Let's bring in Joe Truzman. He is a research analyst, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, a nonprofit research institute focusing on national security and foreign policy. He joins us now. And Joe, you specialize in Palestinian militant groups and Hezbollah. According to the Times of Israel, Joe, President Trump was the first world leader to announced this on social media, saying, quote, from President-elect Trump, we have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you, end quote. Joe, what impact do you believe that his words of, quote, all hell will break loose if the Gaza hostages are not released by the time of my inauguration? How much impact did that have on this deal and negotiations? And you know a little bit more about this deal and you're hearing things. So give us some insight on that as well.
Right. So just for your first question, yeah, I think it did. His words, President Trump's words did have an impact here. I think if it didn't, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. So this is good news, right? Especially for the families of the hostages that we're seeing this movement and a potential ceasefire. So nevertheless, I think what has plagued this situation, this war in the Middle East, is that this current administration didn't do enough for the Israelis, didn't do enough to put pressure on Hamas, and not only Hamas, but its allies, to sign a ceasefire deal. Yeah. Listen, we're almost 16 months into a war, and now what we're seeing is this ceasefire deal coming together. However, we have to understand, and we have to be honest with ourselves, is that Israel is going to pay a steep price to get these hostages back, meaning that potentially over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for these hostages. And many of these prisoners have blood on their hands. So again, it's a steep price, but Israel seems to be willing to pay for it.
You know, we are just breathing a sigh of relief with so many of the families who are waiting for their loved ones to come home. We know there are about a third of the hostages that are believed to still be alive. You talked about the steep price that Israel is going to play. There are a lot of people who want to say that Palestinian militant groups, when in actuality, we're talking about terror groups. I mean, these are terrorists, and there has been no genuine effort from the terrorists to really forge a ceasefire until now. So when you talk about that steep price and you talk about those Palestinian prisoners who are going to be released, is there a concern that these prisoners are part of these terrorist organizations and this really may not be the end that so many are hoping and praying for?
Right. It's an excellent question. And we could look back to 2011. Unfortunately, Israel has been in this situation before. In 2011, Israel had to release over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for one IDF soldier. And many of these prisoners that were released, many of them with blood on their hands and members of armed organizations in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, they were released. And then what did they do? They went back to their old ways. And some of them, specifically Yahya Sinwar, who used to be the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, was actually released in that deal, in the 2011 deal. So Israel, I think, really, they learned from their mistakes there. I think they took a hard look at who they were going to release in this deal. But yeah, many of these prisoners will likely go back to their armed groups, to their old ways, and attack Israel in the future, I'm sorry to say.
Joe, we're hearing that Hamas officials are calling on their forces not to make a move until some official announcement is made. Formally, it needs to be ratified. Go into details on that and what we're expected to see coming up at this press conference in Doha.
Right. I think right now, everyone, both parties, whether it's Israel or Hamas and its allies, especially the nation states that back Hamas, like Qatar, for example, obviously they've been deeply involved here. And I think they want to get all their ducks in a row here before they announce anything specific. Now, this is very important here. I think what has been happening behind the scenes is that, especially from Qatar, who has backed Hamas, they have been, their goal here in this whole deal is to make sure that Hamas regenerates or recovers from this war, that essentially that Hamas stays in power in the Gaza Strip, okay? So I think both of these organizations, or rather both of these actors, Hamas, Qatar, they're again trying to get all their ducks in a row here before they come out and say anything tonight or tomorrow about this deal. However, again, I stress this right now at this point, if Israel stops the war and they do not attack Hamas any further, Hamas will regenerate. And unfortunately, I believe we will be back at this cycle of violence in the near future.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, because we have heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly say that he is committed to eradicating Hamas. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays into this. I'm going to read to you a portion of this possible agreement, because it brings up a question. And again, we're waiting to hear the details, but this is reportedly what would take place in this 3-phase deal. The first phase, they say, would kick off a 42-day ceasefire. So I'm going to stop right there. When you say a 42-day ceasefire, what is your interpretation of that? Because it doesn't mean it's a ceasefire, as far as what I'm reading, that is permanent.
Right. I think it's, in the simplest terms, a pause in fighting. However, this pause in fighting, we have to remember that these cessation of hostilities, even if it's for, let's say, 42 days, it's going to allow Hamas and its allies to essentially regroup, right? And I think that's a problem. And remember, this isn't just Hamas here in the Gaza Strip. I mentioned allies, but there's about 8 to 10 other active armed groups that are aligned with Hamas that have been fighting Israel. So there's a lot of different actors involved here. And these 42 days will give them pause, but they'll be able to regroup. And I think that's an issue for Israel.
Okay, so a minute ago, Joe, you said that you believe Hamas will regenerate. Backed by whom? You said Qatar, but are we talking about Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis? They're going to join in and go, well, now, wait a second, you still have our backing. Don't give up this easily.
Right. No, very good question. So, listen, despite Israel's ability to stop smuggling into the Gaza Strip, Hamas still found a way to smuggle arms into the Gaza Strip, whether it was through the Sinai, whether it was the Mediterranean. They were able to do it. Now, if Hamas is left, even if the small elements that are still fighting Israel right now are left intact, which I'm afraid is going to happen, they will be able to regenerate. Iran's not going to stop. For example, Iran is not going to stop supporting Palestinian armed groups. The Houthis aren't going to stop supporting these Palestinian armed groups. So I fully expect smuggling to resume to the Gaza Strip, which will allow Hamas to regenerate. However, I don't think it'll be something quick. I think it will take time, okay? So I stress that. This won't happen in months. It will take years. But eventually, I think we'll be back at square one the way things are going right now. But I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, typically you don't see terror organizations give up the ideologies that lead them to commit terror acts and do what they do. So what, in your mind, does this mean to the Palestinian people? Because they're watching this happen as well. There are also Palestinian people, and there are people who live in those Palestinian areas who are also being terrorized by these terror groups. So as they're watching this play out, what are they thinking at this time as well?
Right. I think right now, at least in the short term, it's a sense of relief. They've been caught in this war for 15, 16 months. So life has been very difficult for them. However, they are going to return, unfortunately, back to their old lifestyle with Hamas in power. And their allies in power as well in the Gaza Strip. And you can even include the West Bank, too, which we haven't talked about much. But nevertheless, in the Gaza Strip, I think eventually things will be rebuilt. It will take a lot of time. years for sure. But Hamas will likely stay in power, and the Palestinians are going to be the ones that end up suffering a lot here after the war. So it's a big problem, not only for Israelis, but for Palestinian civilians.
Yeah.
Joe Truzman, I want to bring you back in and ask you, a minute ago, you said that the comment that President-elect Donald Trump made that all hell, quote from Trump, all hell will break loose if Gaza hostages were not released by the time I am inaugurated. That is coming up on Monday here in about 5 days. You said it did have some impact, his words. So let's go back the last 4 years or the last 16 months of this current administration, the Joe Biden administration. He is prepared to say farewell to the American people tonight. During that speech, he's going to tout his foreign policy. Along with that, with the hostages, is this a slight to his administration that they couldn't help in these mediations get anything done, and a nod to Trump? Do you think it goes far deeper than that, or do you think it's just the timing is not really, it doesn't impact anything else?
Right. I think I'll say this. I think at the beginning of the war, the Biden administration did a great job helping Israel. Right. They showed significant support, not only politically, but militarily as well. All right. But after that, as the war went on, what happened was there was a lot of mixed messaging from the Biden administration regarding Israel, and especially the withholding of important of weapons. And Hamas and its allies, they noticed this stuff, and this is a problem. So it emboldened Hamas to buckle down essentially and continue fighting. But now that we're seeing, after Trump's warning essentially that all hell will break loose in the Middle East if Hamas doesn't agree to a ceasefire before his inauguration, again, I think it did have some effect. I think I would give Biden, but the Biden administration, at least some positive notes here about this war. But at the end of the day, I think Trump's message was, I guess you could say, the last nail in the coffin, right? To get this deal done, because I think Trump meant what he said. All right. And I think that motivated Hamas, or at least compelled Hamas and its backers to do something. And now we're seeing today what looks like an agreement to a ceasefire deal.
Okay, we want to bring in Joe Truzman right now. Joe Truzman is a research analyst, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. That's a nonprofit research institute focusing on national security and foreign policy. He is joining us right now. And so, Joe, I want to just talk a little bit more about what Yair mentioned in terms of the Abraham Accords. We saw during President-elect Trump's first administration, he established some pretty strong relationships with the Arab world, within the Arab world. Now we're seeing some more business deals that are coming through for the United States, strengthening those relationships. How significant are those relationships to the broader scope of what's happening here between Israel and Hamas and with a lot of these other terror organizations?
Right. So I think if there's something that scares Hamas, that scares Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other Palestinian terrorist organizations, including their backers like Iran, is that for Israel to make peace with its Arab neighbors. Right. That's what bothers them the most. I suspect that at least a part of why Hamas launched the October 7th attack was to try to derail any peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So nevertheless, a strengthening of the Abraham Accords with other Middle East countries, I think is a great thing for Israel, and something that Iran and, of course, Hamas and other Iran-backed groups do not want to see. And it's a threat to them. It is. So I think this a strengthening of the Abraham Accords may be a part of a strategy here later down the road where Israel will try to, again, eliminate Hamas or its other allies in the region, especially the Houthis in Yemen, with which we know they've become a significant problem over the last 15 months or so. So a lot is going on behind the scenes, but I think a strengthening of the Abraham Accords will be a key strategy or key component of the Trump's foreign policy in the next 4 years.
You talked about the future of those hostages. The Israeli military already preparing to facilitate a program called Wings of Freedom to take in these hostages. Hopefully, God willing, that will be this Sunday, the first of the phase 33. Joe Truzman, we're going to come to you. You got to go somewhere else, but let's get you one last time. Israeli Security Cabinet announcing they will vote on Thursday morning. Joe, take us into that vote. What does that mean? How is that set up?
Right. I think the prime minister will lay out the plan to the cabinet, and we'll get an approval. Now, there are some elements of the cabinet that will likely not want to approve this, unfortunately. But again, Israel, we've talked about it earlier. Israel needs to achieve this goal, the specific goal, rather. And the specific goal is to get the hostages, all of the hostages back. But again, like I said before, it's a steep price, right? They're going to have to release potentially hundreds of Palestinian prisoners with blood on their hands. And also something that's very important here that we haven't talked a lot about is that the violence in the West Bank, where Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist organizations are fomenting violence, have been doing that for the last 4 years. It wouldn't surprise me that after this issue with Gaza is over, that the Israelis pivot to the West Bank. So we may see something there in the near future. But nevertheless, I think right now what the prime minister is trying to do, again, is trying to achieve that goal of getting those hostages back.
Yeah. Well, Joe, we want to thank you for joining our extended coverage here of the breaking news. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your insight. Thank you for being with us today.